5 or 6 years ago,
Okay,
and
I was gone by then, but yeah.
I lived in Damascus, but I used to work at the Amazon right downtown Baltimore.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I had a buddy that did that, Mandela Brown. He worked at like the shout out, uh, and he would do like he was like local hip hop stuff. I don't know if he ever got any bigger than that, but we I went to college with him, so
Heck yeah, Baltimore's got an interesting vibe.
dude. And the music scene, especially in Baltimore, is a little weird. It's like there's like this like it's not like a huge city, but there's like this big underground kind of like hip hop scene, and then there's this big underground like for some reason metal scene. You know, like those two genres only. Like there's no country. There's very little like punk or like pop or anything like that or indie even. There's like small. Obviously, every city has that, but it's like yeah, it's weird vibe. I remember going to a lot of like punk shows when I was in my 20s out there, and like you'd see the same people at every show. Like every show would be like the same people. This little club that holds 500 people, you know, like it was always interesting crowd sometimes. But
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Dinner,
Resources.
life, friends is boring. We must not say so.
this is Andrew Whitstadt, and you were listening to Heavy Bored, and we're recording this on February 15th, 2025. My guest today is Paris Hart. Paris is a musician, a fashion designer, an entrepreneur, a producer, and an artist who has used the unorthodox indie route to build his career from the ground up, putting out his own music, his own way, and on his own timeline. Paris Hart has released 2 studio albums, Social Disconnect in 2020 and Silicon Creek in 2021, as well as several singles and an EP entitled Search for Me just last year in 2024. And his latest single, The Lights, came out just last month in January of 2025. And it is, of course, linked below, listeners, and available on Spotify and wherever else you listen to your music. And it is a pleasure to welcome him onto Heavy Bored today. Paris Hart, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Bored.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. I love the vibes that you have and the conversations that you have. So just thankful to be a part of it.
Yeah, of course. We're glad to have you on. Like, I'm always interested in that too, like how people discovered the podcast and all that. Like, because I was always like, yeah, reading. I'm always like, oh, we're gonna do literature, we're gonna do books, but I mean, movies and art and all that stuff. And then when like your management reached out, I was like, oh, yeah, we should do musicians too. Like, yeah, we got musicians come on here, everybody come on here, and we'll just do art and all that stuff. Yeah, so I appreciate that, man. I really do. Because I do want to have like a very open kind of art forward vibe to it. So I'm glad when people pick it up. It means I did something right. But the first question I like to ask all the artists that come on here, I like to start off with kind of like, what was your childhood like? You know, where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did these early years start to form you as an artist?
Ooh, the early years, they're pretty interesting. So when my parents had me, they were still trying to like figure life out. So I was born in a town called Olean, but I lived in a town called Salamanca, which is a town in western New York. It's a small Indian reservation. So just that was a culture shock coming from a black dad, Puerto Rican mom. So that the culture growing up was really interesting, learning about like all the different types of Christians. You had like Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, and then you had the Native Americans in the religion that they follow.
Oh yeah.
And then just being at home as well. So that was really interesting and gave a nice little outlook early in life about all the different types of religions and backgrounds. And my mom was a CNA and my dad was going to college when I was young and just jumping in between jobs and, just really trying to hustle. So seeing him do that had me be like, you know what? Like, I saw him go from like jumping from job to job to being like a school administrator. So if he could do that just by working, like, I could do this music thing. So that kind of really got me going.
Yeah, absolutely. How close to Canada was that on that west side of New York?
We're about like an hour 20 or 30 from the falls.
Okay. Yeah. Do you know what tribe it was that you were? How did that even happen? How did you end up being born on like a Native American reservation?
So my parents met at college, and the college that my dad went to is called St. Bonaventure. It's like 15, 20 minutes from the reservation. So when he got out of school, like was looking for a nice cheap place to raise the family, and there was pretty cheap back then, and like the vibes there were pretty good compared to like neighboring towns. Yeah,
that's interesting too, because I mean you hear so much about that, like it's always usually like a negative thing, and I think that in recent years people are like trying to like show people that there's more to it, like when you're on the reservations, like like TV shows and like Reservation Dogs and stuff. Like where like, because before that, all you got was like little tidbits. It's like, oh, it's miserable. It's like, oh, economically depressed and everybody's an alcoholic or whatever. And it's like, well, actually, I mean, there's a community here and it's like people living here and like, and for many generations at this point living there. Like, so it is always kind of, I don't know, I guess there's a lot of confusion about it. So yeah, that's very interesting. Like growing up in that space.
Yeah, a lot of people, like, when I used to tell them that I was from a reservation, they'll be like, do they have electricity? Like, do they still live in peas? I was like, no, they're regular people just like you and me.
Yeah. Cable TV and PS2, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about that, too, because I think you were born in 99, right? You were... So you're like 10 years younger than me exactly. I was 89. So I was like, okay, yeah, we're definitely be talking about the generational things because, I mean, one, because it's just all over discourse in terms of the internet and stuff. Everybody's talking about generations and blah, blah, blah. But I'm interested with the music angle of it at least. But like living out there, when did music and art come into your life?
Ooh, from an early age, I like really enjoyed it. That was back when we had like the CD racks and the books. So my dad was a huge music head, and like he really pushed onto me at a young age, like, listen to country, listen to rap, listen to all these different guys. So growing up, I would listen to, like, him being from New York, I listened to a lot of the New York rappers, the Biggies, the DMXs, Ja Rule, and then just being up by Buffalo, we have, oh my gosh, Rick James, the Goo Goo Dolls, and then they have a really big like country, alternative, and just big rock scene out there. So growing up, I really, really listened to a lot of different genres, a lot of different artists, and I enjoyed that about that, as well as like the Native Americans. In school, we had to take Seneca because that was the tribe. So we had to take that in elementary school all the way up until 6th grade. So we learned about the music that they played, the genres, the vibes, and yeah, just it was a big, big music hub being over there.
Yeah. Which is crazy because you wouldn't think that. Yeah, everybody, when they think music hubs, they automatically say, okay, Brooklyn, like New York, yeah, like LA. There's some stuff. I grew up in the mid-Atlantic area, and like that kind of like mid-Atlantic from like kind of like Virginia, maybe even North Carolina to like Philly, Jersey, some into New York. But when you got to New York, it was a different vibe. There was just kind of that like indie rock explosion, and that when I was in high school that I was just obsessed with, and they were all coming out of Jersey and like Philly and all of that. Not too many out of Baltimore, but yeah, that's crazy. That's I mean, that's awesome. I think it's cool that like most people they get exposed to this through their parents, right? Like when you're getting exposed, especially music and stuff, music and movies maybe are the two big ones, books. Like your parents are handing you things, you're a kid, you don't know anything. And then like they're handing you like the stuff that they love. Like, I'm a huge Beatles guy just because that's what we listened to in the car, like on road trips. I have boomer parents, so they were like huge Beatles fans. They just put the records on when we were going in like a vacation or beach trip or whatever. So I would just be listening to it all the time. And you just kind of get exposed. And that's what, like, the next question is always like, what were the first kind of artists, musicians that you were enamored with, or who are your go-to kind of inspirations?
Oof. So growing up, I was big into like India Arie and Lauryn Hill, and a lot of those the female like R&B artists back then, as well as like the Marvin Gayes, the Buddy Hollies, like a lot of the stuff that my dad tried putting me in front of was like songs that really had a message of like, self-empowerment, self-growth, like, this might have been a bad thing, but we turned it into this. So a lot of those type of songs that I really fell into.
Yeah, yeah. Because it's always, music is one of those ones too, where like there are people, I don't know, the lead singer of REM always said, like in an interview once, most people have like a bad taste in music. He's like, because most people have a passive like fandom in music where they're just kind of whatever comes on the radio, they're like, oh, I like it. Like they're not seeking things out. They're not actively like kind of very engaged like some kind of music heads are. And it's interesting because when you are into it and you start going to all these different genres, you're like, oh, there's all these different sounds that can come out of it. And there's all these different histories that made those sounds. Like you have to go and you start working your way back. Like Chuck Berry, like I want to talk to you about that. I saw that you mentioned in an interview. Yeah. So we're going to talk about that. But yeah, like any particular artists that are like, you're always going to be obsessed with, or like you always go back to, or, yeah, any of those, like.
I'll say like Stromae is the one that I go back to, and Chuck Berry. A lot of his stuff is really funky. Like him and the Isley Brothers, what they were able to do, like early before music really took the big stage that is on now. That it's just those artists are really ones that I tend to pay homage to and just look deep into, because like Isley Brothers and Chuck Berry, like they didn't even have big fan bases before it all happened, and just what they were able to blow up, especially as like black musicians back then, is just crazy.
Yeah, especially I love the stories of Chuck when he's getting arrested in the South for like banging white girls or whatever. Like he was just constantly getting arrested for that, like in the 50s. Like yeah, just fantastic. Yeah,
wild man.
Exactly, dude. And that guy, I remember, it's so crazy for him too, because okay, this guy like literally is the guy that inspired Elvis and like these people, like and then he was playing like Warped Tours like up until his death. He was like in his 80s doing the Duck Walk, playing the Warped Tours with all these punk bands, and then Chuck Berry comes out like kind of like, and at that time too, I think it was like punk scene had kind of evolved into like this screamo, like kind of like hardcore stuff with like the emo like angle that came in, and Chuck Berry just coming on stage as like one of the headliners, like 80 years old. Like that guy was like, he was doing it till the day, I mean, till he was gone. I mean, my God, what an animal. That guy was insane.
For real, and you could tell that he was someone that like loved it. Like
yeah,
he wanted to be on stage, and like that type of energy, especially in music, is like so pure to be like able to see.
Yeah. Real pure. I mean, just American too, like that kind of American wild kind of. And I guess the British had something to do with rock and roll too there in like the 70s, but like in that early part of America and kind of this is rock and roll, like Chuck Berry like is such an icon. All those guys. I'm a big Bo Diddley guy and all, like just huge. We wouldn't have any of the pop music from like, or anything coming out of that without these guys just breaking barriers in the 50s and earlier even too. I wanted to ask you about lyricists though too, because yeah, you're a songwriter and all that. You're writing your lyrics. Like any favorite lyricists? Because I know it's different too. It's like, oh, you can really appreciate lyrics, or you can really appreciate music, or sometimes the bands have that magic formulation of both. Any lyricists that are like your favorite or like your go-to, like songwriters, like?
Ooh, for lyricists, I was listening to a bunch, but Kendrick kind of took everything this last year with what he did in the Rap Beef, and then even his album. He kind of took most of my playlist for lyricists. Yeah,
absolutely. And then then you already mentioned like Biggie and stuff, those guys coming out of New York. It's, I guess Kendrick's more West Coast, but still like there's like he was inspired by them. like those great lyricists of like the early 90s, late 80s and stuff. And then of course those guys were inspired by, yeah, I mean, a lot of the blues stuff that came out like even earlier and earlier. I always ask that too, because yeah, lyrics are one of those things that like, some pop songs can have lyrics nobody cares, right? Like the lyrics are just like, well, it's party or whatever, it's fun. Then you put on a Kendrick record, you put on like some of these big lyricists. I mean, my favorite is Isaac Brock of Modest Mouse, and like you put those on and it's just another level. Like it's just another level because the lyrics are hitting just as much as the beats, just as much as the flow, like just as much as everything else. And it just elevates the music to a point where you're like, oh wow! Like even people give Taylor Swift shit just because she's so popular. She's a great lyricist. like she writes some great lyrics, and they're like, yeah, you get that connection, that meaningful. That's going to keep coming up, yeah, because we're like writing an artist kind of podcast, but yeah, okay. So I do want to talk about Berry. So you mentioned Chuck Berry as a big influence in an interview I read, and I feel like Chuck is so underloved, and despite how loved he is, he's still underloved, like underappreciated. What was it about Chuck that you kind of fell in love with?
The videos of him, like the interviews, it just seemed like he didn't really care, and he didn't care, but he didn't care and was like naive to everything. He was like pretty educated man, so to see someone like him just be carefree, be kind of lackadaisical, but still know his stuff. Like, I mean, I remember early in music, when I was getting into it, everyone was trying to fight for the headlining position. And everyone's like, oh, I want to headline a festival, I want to headline a show. And I remember listening to one of his interviews early in my career, and he was like, I don't care. We can all get paid. Like, if you want me to go first or last, that's, like, I'm here to perform. I'm not here to do anything else. So hearing that early on and, like, his music, the barriers he was able to break down, like he made a simple song about Route 66. Like he made something so simple become like, oh, like I never looked at it like that, or I never cared to think about all the stops or where it goes. Like just his approach to things is really intriguing, and I was enamored by that. So that was really early on who I really listened to.
Yeah, absolutely. For a lot of times it was those guitar licks. I remember being a kid hearing some of those guitar licks and just kind of being like, what is that? Like, that is good. And, this is like 50 years after the big hits came out. I was listening to it. So, yeah, that's insane. And I live out in Nevada now. So it's like when we moved out here, we'd go on like Route 66, like actually come through. And we stopped at Peggy Sue's, like the diner that all these guys would stop at when they were touring, like back in the day. And there's like they still have like a lot of the photos and like signed pictures of like Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly and like all the guys that were touring throughout the 50s there, like when rock and roll was literally being birthed to the world. It's just insane. And it's bigger now. Like they had the original like little diner, which was like 2 tables and like a little bar with like 4 seats, like very old school, like roadside trailer diner. And then, they've expanded now, so it's like huge. It's like got like hundreds of tables and stuff because it's like a landmark people stop at. But I'm like, yeah, this is where Chuck Berry sat in this little diner here, like probably like 3 a.m. coming into LA or coming out of LA. But yeah, man. One of the things I wanted to ask you about in an interview from 2024, you called yourself a nature junkie. And I would ask, what do you mean by that? And what do you get out of nature? Does it inspire you? Why do you call yourself a nature junkie?
So that's probably the biggest way I cool down. Like if I just go to a show or if I'm out of town, as soon as I get back, I just have to like disconnect from my phone. I'll get my dogs all leashed up, and then I usually just go in the mountains and like I'll take a notebook, a pen, and just try to be off grid and just just being in nature. I feel like it's so important to be present. Like we could get lost in life. I always say life's full of distractions. Like as soon as you wake up, it's like your phone could distract you. You could be there for 2 hours. You could get up and cook something, and it'll take you like 2 or 3 hours to cook something, depending on what you want to cook. Like you could literally get distracted by a million things before you even get out the house. So I try to like really be present. And when life starts to get a little hectic, maybe I get upset with something or whatever the case may be, I like to go in nature and be like, like I'm just a pebble, like I've been listening to Khalil Gibran lately, so like I'm just a pebble of sand, of sand on the beach. So I try to like really take nature and use it as a cool down method of like, hey, it's gonna be okay. Like we're just in another day on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. There is something to it. Like there's something tranquil. Like it's like, oh, like being a human and you're going out into the nature kind of. It's like, oh, you belong here. Like there is something primal. Like when you're just, and yeah, whatever, you can drive in your car and drive 20 minutes up the road, and now you're back in civilization and it's fine. But like just being there for like an hour to a couple hours, or do you camp at all? Do you stay for days, or is it just like a few hours, like walk the dogs and?
So I try to do like day hikes. So I'll get there at like noonish, and then I'll try to hike till like 10 or like 9 p.m. and just try to take the whole day. But I want to get into camping, but something about taking my dogs with me overnight, I'm like, I don't want them to get in anything, or
Yeah.
yeah, they're rambunctious.
Yeah, I'm not a camper myself. Yeah, I've done it a few times, like as a kid and all that, and I did it once in college with some buddies. But it was just an excuse to like drink and smoke weed, or, like in the woods. But like, yeah, sleeping on the ground, I'm too American for that. Yeah, I'm much too American. I'm like, no, I need a nice mattress, Serta mattress, refrigeration, air conditioning, heat, like, yeah, ice machine.
Not the bugs.
Yeah,
The bugs
exactly.
are the worst.
Yeah, exactly. But when you said that about like kind of disconnecting or like unplugging from, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this, and I might write an essay on this about how actually like social media and that kind of stuff like almost hurts creativity. Like it almost makes you not as focused, one, but it can also, I think, it make you focused on the wrong things. Like you start focusing on whatever, the discourse of the day, air quotes, discourse, listeners, because it's never ending. It's 24/7. It's always going on. There's always something you could talk about, whether, a new single, a beef in this like music industry, politics, like whatever it is, like you can just find something, whatever you follow, and it'll tell you to think about this all day or for a few days instead of focusing on your stuff. And I was just, I mean, I didn't plan on asking you this, but I'm thinking about it now with kind of, do you think that like social media is kind of like antithetical to creativity, or I don't know, because it's a yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of pros and cons to it. I feel like there's a lot of pros because a lot of the things on there are kind of controversial. So, just giving an opinion on any of the topics you see, like, could be a good idea for a song. But then, like, the cons are, that's what everybody else is consuming. And, like, each human is kind of like their own little machine with, like, if you input certain things out, like, you're going to output certain things. So if you're online listening to, like, the biggest artists, like, I believe that you're going to try to, like, sound like them or, have the same type of songs as them. And it just becomes really, like, repetitive. So I think taking like a little bit at a time is like helpful, but I think too many people get on there and like compete or like weigh themselves against other creators, and I think that is like real detrimental for not just creatively but like mentally as well.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because there is, and like I want to get to this too and ask about it being like a tool for artists, especially doing like kind of independent stuff. Like it is great for that, but then it's also like you have to have rules. You have to be careful because otherwise you're going to get distracted away from what you love. You're going to just start arguing talk about distractions. You get into some comments with somebody that could take hours of your day away, and you're upset and you're thinking about it, and like it's like, okay, well, didn't you want to write today? Like, didn't you want to start doing something? But I like your point about how it makes you kind of just do what everybody else is doing. It's almost like this conformity machine, like, cause this thing goes out, it goes to millions of people, gets shared, all of that. Why wouldn't it make everybody start repeating that or like conform to this one style or this one way, this one talking point, whatever it is? So yeah, that's all. I mean, it's interesting how that works now. Yeah, the pros and cons of it. I mean, and it's an endless kind of debate, but yeah, nature's always interesting too. I know we went all over the place with that one, but still, it's podcasting,
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a vibe.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it's about vibes. I always tell people, don't look, if we're having fun, people listening are having fun. It's about like kind of vibing, and like doesn't mean it can't get tedious, but still. I wanted to talk to you about strengths and weaknesses, because I've seen you talk about strengths and weaknesses as an artist specifically, and kind of the ability to recognize that and bring in collaborators when making art, if you know, for weak points, whatever. When do you usually do that? Is there a feeling that sparks it, like a frustration? How do you find your kind of strengths and weaknesses as an artist?
So any artist out there listening, I tell everybody, try everything. Try to produce, try to songwrite, try to make your own album covers. Just give everything a shot, because you don't know if you're good at it until you do it. So I'm big on that. And then once you try everything, you kind of have a good understanding of, like, you know, what you need. So if you need someone to help with, you know, lyrics, then you could get yourself in a room with a songwriter. If you need someone for like graphic design, you could get with someone like that. So that's like the first point I would say. And then just for me personally, I realized, like, I like making my album covers. I like making my single covers. I love songwriting. I like just being able to express myself. But I really suck at like producing and tracking my own vocals. So like, I mean, I could sit there for hours and try to learn it, but I just feel like doing that wouldn't really help the songwriting process, and it'll be too much of me on the track. I feel like I like certain ways I sound. I mean, just because the way that like our body's made up, like my voice is going to sound so different on the track rather than someone else. So I feel like I work with AJ Payette, and he's a beast, and he actually really understands like the how my voice should sound, how it should be layered, as well as like when we get into the studio to record, he'll be like, okay, what's the direction of the song? What's the meaning? Where are we gonna go? You're not just saying this just to say this, are you? And then that conversation usually brings up a deeper meaning in writing the songs. So the way I write my songs is I write half a song and then I put it down. So once it starts getting hard or starts getting repetitive or whatever the case may be, I believe that like if people, kind of like what you just said, like if we're having fun, then people are going to enjoy it. Like the same for music. If we're not having fun making it, then people aren't going to have fun listening to it. It's going to feel like a money grab. It's going to feel like, you know, it's unauthentic. So we do a good job of like I'll write half the song, get in the studio, and then he'll ask like, okay, what's the direction? You gave this POV in the chorus and in the first verse. What direction do you want to give the second verse? And then I'll sit there and I'll think about it, and then I'll write the whole second half of the song in the studio. So just getting a good mesh like that I think that's important because it helps with the songs, and I think the listeners are really enjoying it as well.
Yeah, when I saw you talking about it, I was like, that's interesting, and you don't see people talk about it. And I think every creative or everybody, whatever, you know, whatever your form of choice is, painting, writing, music, like dance, like this strengths and weaknesses, you know, we don't think enough about that. And I think it's hard to see a lot of times, maybe even hard to admit. So I was just so fascinated when you were talking about that. Yeah. Like finding, like, be like, oh, recognizing your own weaknesses, not just, you know, we're not talking about like personal weaknesses or anything, listeners, but like, you know, artistic kind of, we want it to sound this way and we're failing at it and we know we are. So like, okay, like, you know, it's not sounding right to me, or it's not feeling right. Like, you know, what do you think of this? And you think of like all the great songwriters, like collaborators. So, I mean, it's just interesting. Like I remember listening to an interview with now Laura Jane Grace, who's the frontman to Against Me, the punk band. And in an interview, they were saying they wanted to do this track and they wanted the drums a certain way, and their drummer, like, you know, couldn't do it. Like it was like too fast or something, and the drummer in the band, and they were getting frustrated in the studio and they were arguing. He said it was kind of frustrating because he's like, because I was relying on another person, because he's like, I can't play drums, you know, like I was relying on someone else to be like, no, I want it this way, and they couldn't do it. And he's like, so what do we do? Like, do we change the song? Do we bring somebody to do like drums in studio or whatever, and then make my bandmate feel like shit, like, you know, and ostracize them from the creative process? So it's just interesting. I mean, you know, the famous stuff with the Beatles, like I think the reason they broke up was because of, everybody says Yoko and stuff, and maybe that has something to do with distracting John Lennon, but like, you listen to those tapes, those like recordings, those documentaries, like they were just fighting over how the songs would be in the studio. Like they were doing something, George Harrison would do a little lick, and then Paul would be like, no, don't do that there. You know, it ruins the tempo or the what I'm going for. and then they would just start getting into it over that, and eventually, you know, you're just like, all right, well, I don't want to write music with you if like this, because you know they all wanted to do their own projects. It's just interesting how that works. I mean, are there challenges to having collaborators? Like you said, it's a great relationship you have with yours, but like, have you had any like challenges or like things where like, oh, that doesn't feel right, or no, I can't work with you again, or?
Yeah, so I had that early on, but I really tried to change the songwriting process where it's like really real, like minimal with who we bring in, or like if we're bringing someone in, like we're for sure. So it's like the beats, they'll be produced. I'll have like different producers Dropbox me stuff, and then from there I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna tweak it a little bit. We're gonna do this and that. So by the end of it, there's probably like 3 or 4 people that are together on the track, whether it's just me and AJ, like that's just the two, and then if it's a producing duo or just a solo producer on the track, and then maybe another one if we want something to sound a certain way. But we try to make the process like real intimate and not try to bring that many people on board, because it's just too tough with too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's especially some of those like the big pop songs. I'm not talking about the people like Taylor Swift that write their own or whatever, but like you see some of the credits, they'll have like 20 people credited on like a song. It's like, okay, one person like tweaked a line of lyrics and like they have to get credited now. And it's like, okay, you have 20 people collaborating on this. Of course, everybody forgets it like in 6 months or whatever. But yeah, that's interesting with collaboration. I mean, I'm just fascinated by that too, because like because like you're a solo artist, you know, like the artist Paris Hart, and then like, but like you still have, you know, like musicians that you work with, you still have producers that you work with, you still have people that are, I always think of like Rick Rubin too, like everybody's it's like, oh, what does Rick Rubin do? It's like, oh, he says, he's like, look, I don't do soundboards, I don't do any technical stuff, I don't even play an instrument. He's like, it's my taste, my judgment, my ability to help guide artists to be like, well, what do you think this is? What are you feeling in this moment? Like, and you see what it produces. It's just kind of like, oh, wow. How long have you been working with your producer, AJ?
Ooh, we've been working since the pandemic.
Okay.
So during the pandemic, he was overseas in England. And then during the pandemic, something happened with the visas where they switched all the visas around and he had to come back to the States. So I think that was like Brexit time.
Right.
So when that happened, he came to the States and like he worked with another artist that I really liked the way that they sounded. So I shot him a DM on Instagram and was like, hey, I like this. Like, I want my vocals to sound kind of like this. I've seen the work that you've done. Is there a way we could collab? So we met in New York during quarantine, and like that was interesting seeing like the city and the vibes. But then we just realized that it could be a genuine friendship out of it, and I think that's important as well. And I think a lot of musicians, they kind of see the big producers, the big DJs, the big mix engineers, and they're like, I want to work with them. But I think really honing a good relationship and someone where in the studio, like we could say to each other, I like the way that sounds, or I don't like the way that sounds. And getting a comfortable environment means way more than, you know, like the names or the big people that you see. Is just, you know, the relationship means so much and the vibe means so much. So I think getting that down as well is huge.
Yeah. Because I mean, that's too, if you don't like, although I guess that's an interesting thing I'm thinking too, like sometimes the tension between two people making art can benefit it, and then other times it can really really hinder that, like you don't get where you want to go with it. But yeah, that's great. And like I said, I just love that you're talking openly about kind of strengths and weaknesses, trying to recognize themselves, because it is kind of like, how do you progress as an artist? How do you move to the next stage? Like making it better, like trying to think of, okay, what am I weak at? Like what am I really good at? What needs more work? Like it's something, I mean, because it's hard to do, right? Like it's hard to be like, oh, what are my weaknesses? Especially when you're trying to do something creative and putting it out into the world, everybody's judging it. It's like, okay, like you need to judge it for yourself too. And I mean, I stress that on this podcast all the time, like the kind of the importance of taste, of judgment, like having your own taste, your own judgments about things. Because that's how you become an artist. Like that's how you not just like criticize art, but like a fan and all of that. It's so important. I wanted to talk to you about being an indie artist too, kind of like doing it DIY, you know, like kind of, And I know it's a little different. I'm more familiar with the publishing angle. I do have some background in music, but I never got like I was in bands and stuff in high school through college. Never got really beyond kind of the local scene, noise in the basement kind of stuff. But I'm more familiar with kind of the publishing industry and stuff like that. But I feel like there's this huge explosion now in all the kind of art forms of doing the independent route, kind of doing it yourself. But I wanted to ask you, what made you go the indie artist route? You've discussed turning down deals at certain points to follow your own path. Like what made you want to go out and do your own kind of independent route to this?
I just think everything has to make sense. Like, and I gotta know what you played in the band, or if you were a singer, instrumentalist.
I sang and played guitar and bass in most of the bands that I was in. Yeah.
Heck yeah. But I believe that. Yeah, actually, could you repeat the question, please? I was too focused.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah,
that got me so stoked.
What made you want to go kind of the independent artist route? You've discussed turning down deals at certain points in your career. What made you want to follow your own path? Was it something that you were forced to do? Was it something that you chose to do? Like, it is interesting because it's something we like to ask on this podcast when it comes to indie publishing, when it comes to indie producing, like all of this. And yeah, social media is a factor in that too. But yeah, what made you want to go the independent route? Was it just like something you were forced into and you had to make the best of it? Or was it something you consciously chose, like turning down deals because you go, actually, I'm doing my own and I don't need you,
I think the biggest thing is really understanding what a label or what any of the businesses are going to do for you and what they're going to offer you, as well as like understanding your own worth. And I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of musicians, I think, with social media, they might say, oh, compared to this artist, I'm ranked here, or compared to this artist, I rank there. And I think knowing your self-worth before the numbers or like before the art comes out or anything is huge. So I'd have labels come and speak with me and say, oh, we think we could do this, and that. And I'll say, I don't need that. Like, I might need help with this, or I might need help with that. And I think really being able to, once you understand your strengths and weaknesses, it's able to tell somebody what you need and what you don't need, and to be able to understand a deal like better. Because if someone comes and says, oh, like we could help you with playlisting, or we could help you with social media, I'll be able to say, like, I don't need help with that. I could generate my own numbers, but I need help with maybe radio play or something else. So going into those meetings, understanding the strengths and weaknesses, I think really give you a step up in the industry. And I think like the deal just has to make sense. And then, for example, I was speaking with a distribution company for a potential deal last spring about Mayish. And we sat on a FaceTime. It was him, me, and my engineer. And he kind of said some things that like downplayed what I thought I was bringing to the table and what I could do. And just understanding what I was good at and what I was able to do, like it forced a different work cycle. So we wouldn't have those type of conversations again. And like, it upped my worth. So the next time we spoke, it was a different conversation of like, oh, well, you're doing these things well, so we could offer a little bit more. So I think it's really, really important to like just realize like the strengths and weaknesses make it easy to be an independent artist, because when the labels come, they can't just give you a BS deal, or they can't force anything that you don't want to do into their hands. So the creative freedoms, the time links, the restrictions, all those things don't make sense if they're not helping you with what you need help with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I hear it from our writers all the time too, people that went the indie route, where it's like, oh, what if you had an agent? Because in the old days, like even like 10, 15 years ago, you did need that. Like you couldn't just distribute your stuff online. You couldn't just go through Amazon or something and like kind of do your own thing. You did need the institutional backing of agents, distributors, producers, and stuff. And in such a short time, that's changed. It really is kind of, not only do you have ultimate control over your work, you kind of come to the table with a little leverage where you're just kind of like, all right, what are you going to do for me? Because I'm already distributing, you 300,000 people on Instagram or whatever. Like every time I put out a track, like I can distribute it to 300,000 people. Like, can you do more than that? Like, and a lot of time, and nowadays, especially unless it's one of the huge companies, they can't. Like they really can't do more than you can with just kind of I hate the term, but like grassroots kind of, getting your own fans, finding each fan one at a time. I mean, I think it's with podcasting too. I've done it on this podcast. Like, yeah, like one person at a time. Like you build one fan at a time, and then it starts to come, slowly, and like, okay, yeah, there are people out there that dig this, like this, want to be a part of it. Like, you go, okay, cool, yeah, I'm doing what I thought I was, but like it took a while, but still. Yeah, it's just crazy to me, man. And then these people want cuts. So he's like, oh, you get your agent. It's like, oh, well, they're getting 10%. It's like, why am I giving you 10%? Like, how much are you doing for me for this? Like, why am I giving 40% to the publisher? Like, why am I giving, some of these labels too? They want to take 80%, 90% of what you're, the revenue that you're getting from your songs. It's like, okay, why should I give you that? It used to be, well, I'll give you that because we'll do the tour for you, we'll do the distribution for you, we'll do promotional stuff for you, like all this millions of dollars in marketing and distribution. And they just aren't doing that anymore because it's too expensive. So it's like, okay, why am I doing this again? So yeah, I just love that you did it your own way and like kept, and I think, I don't know, I mean, I think like artist integrity too, right? Like you said, go in there and be like, just the way people are talking about it, like some executive across the table. And it's just like, how did this ever work? How did this ever become a huge business where like you have did executives used to know, like used to have a vibe, used to have an eye for this where they were like, okay, that's going to be a hit. Like that's going to be huge with teenagers, or like that's going to be a huge top 40 hit. Like I saw that Elvis movie, the Baz Luhrmann one. And like, one of the storylines of that is the guy is just like, this guy's white singing, quote unquote black music. He's like, he's that's a hit. Like, he's like, that's going to sell everywhere. Like, and he just like found him. Like, he's like, yeah, we're going to sign this guy and put out records. It's like when nobody believed in it. Otherwise it's, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's like missing now or if that's, I don't know, man. It feels like we've lost something with that, or like people used to be able to be like, that's a hit. Like, yeah. And now they're just like, well, how many followers do you have? Where it's like they used to have the confidence in their own industry where they like, we are kingmakers and we can make you the king of the industry if you're writing good songs and blah, blah, blah. But like now it's like, oh, well, we need your help to market, but we're still going to take this much out of your pay. And yeah, so I mean, I want to ask you about this too, Spotify and stuff, like putting your stuff. I know there's constantly a thing, especially with indie artists. And I have friends that have stuck with the music route. And I mean, I'm in my 30s now, so they're still sticking with it in their 30s, and they're putting on Spotify, kind of producing their own records. And yeah, I mean, the pay is terrible. Like, are we talking about Spotify? How is it dealing with companies like Spotify as like an indie artist, like doing your own thing?
It's interesting. I go with multiple distributors right now. So like most of my tracks are sent through different distributors, and like there's a bunch of them that you could just sign up for online and like just go on Google, sign up for them, and then release your music through. So for me, the dealing with those and dealing with Spotify, they can be kind of annoying and like tedious at times, whether it's like, oh, I wanted this to sound like this, or the credits are wrong, or the artwork looks different than what it seems. So it's different, and I mean, we don't get as instant of an access as like being on a big distribution company or like a big label, but I still think that like they respond pretty quick, and like it's pretty easy for an indie artist to like deal with them and deal with those. But yeah, I feel like a lot of the big labels, like they try to make it seem like they could do so much more, whether it's playlisting or getting you on the front page of Spotify. But I don't think that that's where it's at anymore. I think a lot of everything is grassroots, because like just sitting here with you and like we're having a great conversation, and off of this, like we'll both grow our socials and like we'll both grow our numbers. And then in terms of like dealing with a big label, like, I mean, if they give you a Billboard post, let's say a post on Billboard or a post on like iHeart, I mean, that's cool for a day, your numbers would spike, but I truly believe like they don't have the true organic fan bases that they did when they were the only music publications out there. So it's like, I really believe that like all artists out there, like the grassroots vibe is so much more important, and like we as a community could build so much more than what these big corporations are offering. So yeah, I think the grassroots vibe is really like it's king to everything.
Yeah. I remember because like yeah, as I said earlier, I'm like 10 years older than you, but like I remember in high school, so this was like 2004 to 2008. The first big like star came off of YouTube, like music. Like I'm thinking Soldier Boy, and the kind of that song that was everywhere when I was in high school, you know, and uh, just like nobody had seen that. Like kind of, oh, this guy just puts something out on YouTube, and it starts blowing up to the point where people are scrambling to get like deals with him and stuff. And then, you know, whatever the story goes on, now he's a huge artist, but it's just it is kind of, it was, nobody had seen this before, and now you're seeing this new, I don't want to say like revolution, but it's like this kind of just like the old model doesn't work anymore. Like everybody's talking about a model that doesn't exist anymore. I see it in publishing, I see it in every kind of art domain where they're like, oh, well, we'll print this many copies, we'll distribute it here, and we're hope to get like this many sales out of it. It's like, well, that doesn't work the way it did even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's so different. Like you said, you can just distribute it with these, yeah, getting the, oh, we'll get you on iHeartRadio playlists, or, oh, we'll get you on like, you know, the new stuff this week playlist on Spotify. And like you said, yeah, that you get some benefit out of that. Sure. Of course there's a benefit to that, but then it's short-lived. Like everything is algorithmically like kind of, you're getting a spike, and then it just falls off a cliff. Like when you're promoting stuff, you're like, oh, you're getting views, and it just falls off a cliff, like kind of flatline. It's like, okay, no more sharing that one. I had a writer on a few weeks ago, and we were talking about this, where she was talking about how social media is becoming more and more pay to play too, because social media companies have kind of recognized that, oh, there's actually a lot of value to us being able to distribute your stuff, and if you build that organically, great, but like we can charge for that too, and people will pay it, because that's like the only way to distribute your stuff outside of the major kind of labels and institutions. And I mean, and everybody talks about the consolidation, like kind of, oh, we're consolidating like all these labels. Like I remember, growing up, the 90s, early 2000s, every artist was just starting a label. They were just starting like a spin-off label and like putting out their records. And obviously they were doing that to own the music. So there's that, but then also like they were finding good artists. Like they were finding good artists, and maybe some of them were their friends or whatever, but like they're finding good artists out there, and they're putting them up, like, you know, the famous Eminem, 50 Cent, like Dre going out there and finding these guys and just being like, actually, that's really good, and we're going to make it hits. Like, and, you know, like just kind of it. Yeah, I'm just like, where are these people? Like, where are these people that were used to run this industry here? Like,
yeah, it's so interesting, because most people, they just care about the numbers now. Like, I'm big into like the local music scene in Maine, so like whenever artists come, I'm like trying to go to a gig, trying to go to a vibe, and like there's so many low key artists that come and through, and like if you listen to them, you'll be like, holy crap, why aren't you mainstream? Why aren't you big? And it's like everyone has the same kind of story of like, oh well, you know, the labels, they only want someone once they have so many followers or once they have so many numbers. And I think that game is really interesting, because like the labels are, like you said, they used to break artists and get artists big enough where they could, you know, do these tours. Now it's like, okay, let's see how many YouTube subscribers you have, how many TikTok followers you got, and then from there we'll be able to make you a star. I think that approach is like really lazy, and I think that the music industry really has to switch. It's like mental, and switch the way that it functions if it wants to keep dominating, because like someone like Tech N9ne, who doesn't affiliate with the music industry, could still make, you know, like I think it's like something crazy, like above 10 million a year off of what they're able to do. So it's like, yeah, the industry it's good. It's a real good outlet, and like it could really break an artist. But if you want longevity, I really do think that, you know, like the grassroots and the label stuff isn't the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk to you about genres too, and like music. Like your music is listed as like, you know, pop in genre on like iTunes and Spotify and Google and all that. But you blend a lot of genres and elements together. And we already talked about some of the artists and like kind of an eclectic group of artists that like, you know, inspire your tastes and your music. And I just like what I wanted to ask you about using multiple genres. Like it seems like that's where we are now in music, you know, like Beyonce is doing a country album, you know, like why do you blend so many genres? You know, is it just experimentation? Is it looking for that new sound? Or, you know, what is it that's inspiring you to kind of just go out there and be like, no, I don't have to stick to just one genre. I'll just do whatever and call it pop, or, you know, like, yeah.
So I'm like very ADHD when it comes to music. Like I like everything, and I feel like if there's something I enjoy, I want to dibble and dabble in it. So for me, I'm huge on like what we input and like what we consume, as like whether it's through life, whether it's through social media. I really think that like if you focus on what you consume, like it helps with the output. So for me, I try to listen to every album that comes out each week. And like I really try to be on top of as many songs as I can, and like really listening to them, and then really like, oh my gosh, that sounds so different. Whether it's like a chord progression or the way someone did their vocals, I try to be like really, really experimental, and just if I like it, I try it. I try not to do money as like, oh, this song works. This genre is the one that we're going to push, and like this is the sound we're going to do. And I try to make everything off of the vibe and the feeling of it. Because if it feels good, then that means more than like, oh, I liked his rock song, so I'm going to go listen to his rock album.
Right. Yeah, and I'm thinking that too. Look, I remember listening to Kendrick's the Big Steppers album, that first track, United in Grief, and I'm like listening to that snare, like that drum, and he's just rapping over the drum, and I'm just like, this is new. This is like he's taking jazz fusion like into hip hop now. He's like okay, you did like Pimp a Butterfly was doing kind of the funk kind of fusion with it, and like, yeah, that had been done before, but not the way he did it. And then like, okay, now he's getting into this jazz stuff, and I remember hearing that and be like, oh yeah, like that's new, that's fresh, that's blending genres. And I think it is kind of interesting too. I mean, and there's like that craze like where when I was like younger and being in the music scene, there was like all the genres were separate and like people weren't crossing over. And then all of a sudden, kind of like in like the 2006-ish kind of era, there were all this started crossing over. Like all of these punk bands that I liked growing up were like crossing over with like hip hop stuff. Like, and then Travis Barker's doing like hip hop albums. And then like, you're getting like, yeah, like the Odd Future guys were like really inspired by, you could tell by kind of like the Jackass punk era. Like it was almost like a punk rock way to do hip hop, like kind of like weird persona stuff, like kind of, yeah, it just, yeah, I mean, blending genres. And yeah, you see Beyonce doing country, Post Malone's doing country, like you're seeing these people like really kind of, oh well, I don't know if I mess around with this genre. And I don't know. I mean, I just think it's great to like kind of, maybe it is like a natural evolution where you're kind of starting to, we've heard all these genres separately, now let's start moving them together. And then there's people trying to do new genres. Sometimes that fails. Like I think of like the EDM stuff, you know, like when I was in college, like I guess that's still big, but it's kind of fallen off now, right? Like it was huge for a while, like those EDM festivals and stuff, like Electric Daisy Carnival. Although I live in Vegas and they have the EDC, Electric Daisy Carnival, every year, and like there's apparently millions of people that like that still. So, but I remember that like when dubstep became a thing, I was in college and I'd have like friends. They're like, "Oh, you're gonna listen to this Skrillex or something?" I'd put it on. I'd be like, "Fuck this!" Like, like fuck this fucking robot music. Like, it sounds like shit. Like. And then they're like, "Oh, Skrillex was like a emo band guy." I was like, "Oh, yeah, he got into like making robot sounds." Like, get out of here! Give me a tune, dude. Give me a melody. Yeah,
they were king for like that whole summer, like 2 whole summers. They were just running everything.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Everyone wanted a Skrillex remix.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. And this guy had like emo hair, like doing like the kind of like long bangs to the side, doing that shit. I was like, what is this? Needless to say, yeah, listeners, I didn't like the EDM movement when it happened, but you know, it still happened regardless. Didn't matter what I thought. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you about that too, like kind of, I don't know, like moving into like where the industry is headed, you know, like and I get, you know, this is kind of, we're not looking for definitive answers, just like whatever you think, what you're feeling, what you're seeing, kind of, you know, I love indie rock, or I did, you know, and I hear complaints all the time even largest artists saying they can't make money off of album sales any longer, like just how the consumption of music has changed so much. And then therefore that's changed the industry kind of on the back end. My question is, where do you think the industry is headed? Like, where will it be in the future? Is streaming the end game of the industry? Is there going to be something else? I mean, what are you seeing, feeling like what's going on with that?
I think the interesting thing about streaming is that, I mean, so when SoundCloud popped off, it was like you just heard all these different unique sounds that you wouldn't hear like mainstream. And then it took that weird approach where it became like, okay, now it's kind of pay to play. And then Spotify was the same way with Apple Music. When it came out, it was like, you don't know who's going to come across your page. You don't know what's going to happen. And then it became pay to play as well. So with most of these platforms becoming more pay to play, I hope that there's just another streaming platform that comes forward and just really becomes the one where it's like, okay, they're not paying any like artists any money, but you're getting discovered here. Like how TikTok was a few years ago. I really hope that another platform comes out. I'm just waiting for it. But I think it's going to be streaming in like single oriented from this point on. But I think that hopefully within the next few years, there's another platform that is less pay to play, because like a lot of the big labels, they become like shareholders for Spotify. So that is more, Spotify's became more for like bigger artists. And then they also have like pay to play features in Spotify now. So if you're releasing a song, you could pay to put it on the front, like on the Discover page. And I think that once that really gets inside of it's kind of like when a mobile game gets ads. Like I feel like it kind of just pushes people away from it. So I'm waiting, because Spotify just released their betas last year. So I really believe that within the next maybe 2 to 3 years, there's going to be another streaming platform that comes out, and it's more organic, because the users can tell when something's organic. Like I don't know anybody that I don't want to sound like a hater, but the Tommy Richardson, the $1 Million Baby, like I don't know anyone who looked up that song and like searched for it on Spotify, but it was like kind of pay to play, like it was in all of our faces. So I feel like another platform's going to come, and I think YouTube is going to stay relevant for a long time. And I think if you're a musician and you're not posting on YouTube, you have to start posting, because YouTube is like, it pays the best for creators, and it's like, it's really organic. Millions of people use YouTube. So even if someone else is paying to play, like there's so many people on the platform that they're going to find you organically.
Yeah, I will say that too. Like YouTube, especially for like podcasts, because obviously it's different, but still like I'm on Spotify and competing with all the other things people are listening to. And YouTube tends to have the most, what I can notice, like the growth, fucking metrics that they give you. Like YouTube has the most organic growth. Like you can see it happen from like the day you start your channel to like start to kind of doing it regularly, and slowly it will get you there. And of course you can pay to have it promoted, but like I can't afford any of that shit, like to pay for that. So it's just all organic growth for me. But and it takes a long time too. Like how long did it take you to like kind of build up your fan base too? Like that's years of work, to one person at a time, finding the song, finding the music video. Like, yeah, it's great. And YouTube Music is like, I think next to Spotify and all the other ones, it's like the biggest, people get all their music off of YouTube now. Like, especially I guess because you don't have to pay for YouTube Music.
And YouTube's like, it has everything. It has games, it has movies, it has songs. You could go watch someone's live stream. Like YouTube for like consuming content, it has everything. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you about social media too, since I consider YouTube like a version of social media now too, like the way it's kind of like a feed now, and it like pumps stuff into your home screen. And this is always an issue that comes up in the writing world, and it's just like as an artist now, you have to do your own marketing, so to speak, kind of through social media. I want to ask you, how do you navigate social media as an artist? And do you think social media has made the life of like kind of an independent artist better or worse? How do you navigate that? Because there's so many landmines you could step in and stuff that like blow up your whole trajectory or set you back a few years. Or how do you navigate social media as an artist?
I think I think again is a pro and con to social. I'm trying to stay like as middle as I can with everything. So with social media, I think that it really helps because like you could get in someone's face like just off of a post. Like you could post, oh, I feel this today, or oh, I just had a coffee, I just had tea, I just ate a bag of Cheetos. Like you could post anything, and someone out there is like, I just did the same thing. Like we're cool now. So I think it's really cool that you could just interact with anybody. But I do think with all the different platforms that are out there, like it's so important to be on each platform because the demographics on each of them are like super duper different. And you know, if let's say you're not posting on Threads, like, and then you post on Threads and you get 1,000 new followers, or like Blue Sky. I think Blue Sky is pretty big right now. So if you're a creator, like Blue Sky and Threads, they don't have where you're paying to promote. So if you post on there, you have a more likely chance of like just meeting people organically because they don't have those pay for options. So I think just being on all the different platforms, it could be really helpful. But the con is just having to turn into a content creator. Like I think in this day and age, no matter what field you're in, you kind of like have to, because if you go on TikTok, like you could see pro athletes, then you have authors, and then you have musicians, and then you have, you know, like WWE stars. So I think just being able to really be out there and compete against those guys, it just becomes a creativity contest. So I think like it's a pro and a con, and I feel like it could be really helpful, but through any field that you go into now, you kind of have to be a content creator to kind of blow up whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that point too, about because I think of something like TikTok especially, like, and I don't use that as much. It's just to like promote podcast stuff, like clips, whatever, put it up there. And you can get some organic views for sure. But I'm thinking of like people, like, I see Gordon Ramsay on there doing like, you know, duets with people. And I'm just like, you know, like he's not doing that because he wants to do it. Like his PR team is like, you have to do these and like put them out there every few days so that people, and, you know, do your Gordon Ramsay shtick, like kind of yelling about things or whatever. And like that's all orchestrated. Like it's all like, you have to do this now. The biggest artists in the world are just like their managers and like PR people are like, all right, well, we have to do a couple content videos today, you know, like whatever it is. And it's just like, oh man. And you can feel it too. Like you can, like, that's one great thing about social media too, is you can feel the authenticity in a lot of ways. Like obviously you can get away with lying. A lot of people do, but they find out eventually, like they find out eventually that you're not, that you're playing a part, that you're not like being like kind of your authentic self, especially as an artist. You know, people want that in art, but you can feel that kind of desperation or that kind of fakeness like through the screen almost, which is an interesting aspect to it. But yeah, I like what you said about this. Like social media is this kind of, it's a great tool. You can use it in so many different ways, but then there's also this kind of, yeah, you're getting sucked into it, getting too obsessed with being something other than the artist that you're trying to be. Now you're just trying to be like an entertainer on social media as opposed to making music or writing books or whatever you're trying to do out there. It's I mean, and I ask it because I mean I feel it like in myself when I'm like, why am I talking about this? And I'm just like, oh, I wanted to do this today. Like why am I even getting involved in this? Like because it's hard to just use that as like, oh, I'm just going to put it out there through this and not get sucked into scrolling. Like even if you're logging in just to post a promotional thing and you're scrolling 20-30 minutes, you're like, oh god, I got to get off of this thing. Like it sucks you in, and it's like this thing we're all orbiting around. And it was strange for a while there. It feels like it's calmed down a little bit now culturally, but like for a while there, like it was almost dangerous to like put out, even if you were just posting like one of your songs or something, like it was almost dangerous. Like somebody would just get in the comments and like you could have your entire stuff ruined, and you're like, what? Like this random person just said something and like I had nothing to do with this. Like, and then you get punished for it. You have to like, you know, and if you had management and all, they would be breathing down your neck to apologize and then make you look like you're not standing behind what you did. And like people were like, oh, turned off. But it's just a crazy world now. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's huge too, because like that's another thing that just dealing with labels and dealing with corporations, everyone wants like if you get to that point where like you're getting traction, everyone's like, okay, well you have to do everything PC. And I feel like, yeah, I think I feel like it's kind of died off a little bit, and I'm happy that it did. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that is on there is just like a black hole. I try to refresh. So Instagram has this thing where you could like it's in the settings. I don't recall what exactly it is, but once a month I'll go in there and like it'll reset your whole feed. So it will make the page like your new user, and I try to do that once a month because I'll see myself at like the end of the month, like going into a story. Like lately, it was the whole Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds thing,
Yeah.
and then I'm just scrolling, and I'm like, okay, I gotta stop. It's been like 30 minutes. Let me refresh my page, and then it'll just be like drawings or something else that like I'm kind of indifferent about. So I'm like, phew, like no more doom scrolling.
Yeah. Doom scroll. Yeah, that's the new. That's the what they say. Yeah, it's very accurate. It's a very accurate label. Yeah, doom scrolling, black pilling, blah blah blah. Like this kind of internet language. That's interesting to me too. The internet language that's cropping up. But I was going to ask you, because when we're talking about this, I didn't plan on doing this, but it's like with Kanye, and Kanye's kind of, everyone's like, oh, he's crazy. He's doing these breakdowns live on Twitter, Instagram. And I was thinking to myself, I mean, obviously I'm a Kanye fan, but I was just thinking, I was like, I don't know how crazy he is as much as he's pushing boundaries, like even with that shit. Like it was like, oh, he's selling like a swastika t-shirt. I'm like, yeah, that's crazy. But it's also like, that is like the most taboo thing you could ever do. And he's purposefully like people are like, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing. I'm like, I think he knows what he's doing. Like, I think he's purposely like being like, look at me, kind of like, yeah, like, what are you going to do? Like, look at how, like, he's like, you want controversies? Like, check out this tweet. Like, you know, like, I don't know. I mean, what do you make of that? Like, obviously you can go too far with it. You can just become like a parody or like a shell of what you once were. But I mean, when you listen to his music, like, I mean, he's still putting out some pretty good tunes, dude. Like, I don't know how crazy he's going as much as he's like purposely trying to provoke. I mean, I don't know. What do you think of that? What's your take on the Kanye?
I think there's a method to his madness. I think that he likes so to preface it, I think that there's once in a while where the media just finds someone and they're all they talk about. Like you saw Joe Rogan go through it. You saw like when Kanye started dating Kim Kardashian, he was like on everyone's page, and then like recently you saw like Kai Cenat is just everywhere. So I think he really likes that much attention around him, and I really think that he just gets bored and he's like, what can I do that would just spark people to talk or just get my name back out there? And
Yeah.
I think he just loves it. I think he just loves people saying like, oh my gosh, it's like the early Jackasses. Like when we're watching it, we're like, people are actually doing this. I can't believe it. And I think he just really likes the shock value.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too with Jackass, like, because Jackass was a huge part of my childhood, a huge part of like, yeah, I was like 13 when that started, like, you know, seeing that on MTV and just kind of how cool it was. And it was tied up in kind of the skater kind of punk thing. Like they were like, you know, playing that kind of music in the episodes, and they were wearing like the studded belts and like wristbands and stuff, like kind of skater clothes, punk clothes. And I don't know what it was. It was like this huge cultural phenomenon. Yeah. And then you see like, yeah, like the most recent thing they did, I remember watching their most recent movie, and I went into it being like, these guys are like 40 now. Like, what are they doing? You know? And I loved it. I was laughing. It was funny. They had like Tyler Creator come in there, and I was like, yeah, you know, he was watching that, like, because he's like my age, like, you know, he was watching that as like 13 and be like, this is awesome. Like, it's just insane shit. And I even see like, you know, like Logan Paul and stuff like that. And I always say what they do is kind of like Jackass for pussies, where it's kind of like, they're not doing anything like really like, oh my God, you could die doing this. They're just like jumping into like a snowstorm naked or something. It's like, okay, yeah, that's like mild Jackass stuff. Like you're not putting like killer bees on your testicles or whatever. Like, but yeah, I don't know. It was just such a big impact in the culture, and it's still resonating and kind of like the ripples pulling outward. And like I said, I think like somebody like Odd Future, who again were huge when I was in college and stuff. Like they're before they all started going solo. It's like, they were hugely influenced by that, purposely provoking, like, you know, purposely talking about like Eminem style, even like rape in the songs and stuff like that, like just kind of things that are going to make people upset, and they know it, like, and it's part of the point. I don't know. I mean, do you think that's still in music and art? Are we missing that, like, that kind of like rebellion? I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Every time I think of Eminem, I think of the intro to the Crack a Bottle song.
Yeah.
He's like 17 rapes and 4 murders. Like, dude, what is like, yeah, I think the whole PC thing, I have a love-hate relationship with it, because I think there's a lot of things that were out there that, you know, a lot of people were saying and getting away with that is wrong. But I feel like with where social media and everything is now, like, it's kind of evident that we're going to have some of it. So I think that there's a gray line that I think society's still trying to find and like see what's okay to say and what's not okay. But I think that shock value always sells, and I think that a lot of people are afraid to do it because they don't want to get ostracized by like the mainstream brands when the sponsors are like what's really paying the creators. So I think there's an authenticity in it, but I do think that it's starting to become mainstream. Like I'm a huge fan of like Andrew Schultz and what he's doing, and I think that a lot of that stuff is starting to come back mainstream, and I think that day in day we're starting to find like a thin line that's like, okay, we could get to this point.
Yeah, the ebbs and flows of kind of culture. It's interesting to talk about. Yeah, I mean, it's podcasting is for it. It's kind of ebbs and flows of how trends that come in and out like ocean waves. It's like, yeah, I think that's happening, and I think just like everything else, like, yeah, like you said, the PC stuff, it always starts like it's like, okay, yeah, this is a well-intentioned, like most people can agree with the most basic premises, like. And then all of a sudden it started, I think it was social media in terms of like everybody started to take everything in this different context. And I don't know, that's why I think I asked about the Kanye kind of unplanned, just because I was thinking about it when you said it, like kind of like, well, that guy is like, I think he knows that he's like, I'm going to be as controversial as I can be and damn the consequences. Because I guess, yeah, he's so famous and so rich and so like ingrained in the culture, like American icon, that like, what are you going to do about it? Like, oh, take away his Adidas deal. He's like, okay, fine. Like, he's got another deal. Like, yeah, just crazy. I wanted to ask you about like the kind of like your musical persona too, because like, is there a difference between, you know, Marquis and Paris? Is Paris sort of like an artistic alter ego in like, you know, like the vein of like Madonna, Slim Shady, or something like that? How did you come up with that to call yourself Paris Hart and all that?
So I used to go by a different name. And there was another artist in Chicago that had the same name, but like once my traction like kind of surpassed his and he dwindled in the dust, he sent a cease and desist to my team.
Right.
And then we did No Name, and I was like, you know, I don't care about the name. I'm gonna diss him. I'm just gonna make it as music as I can. So after that, I was like, what's another good song or like a good name to go with? And you know, what's a good artistic name? So I thought about it, and like Paris Hart really, really resided with me because my older stuff tended to be more about, you know, like depression and about real deep things. And I was playing some of my music, my unreleased, and he was like, you know, I really like these songs. I can feel like my heart's been broken and get through my feelings, but at the end, I don't feel like a depressed little punk. Like I don't feel sad. And I started laughing, and I didn't think anything of it, but then the next few days I was like, you know, like Paris being the city of love and like the heart with like what you love with, I want my music to be something that like resonates in your heart like that, where like you could feel those feelings. You could listen to a song like Search for Me and feel the story I'm displaying, or even something like The Lights, but then at the end, like you don't feel depressed. Like you could still go on with your day and be like, I learned a valuable lesson. I see where he was coming from, but like there's like happiness and love in it. So like Paris Hart was, it started off as an alter ego, but over time I found like a nice little blend between Paris and Marquis of like, you know, this is who I am. I'm naturally a person who's like smiling. I remember my coaches in high school, some of them would call me because, you know, I was just always a happy person. Like whatever the circumstances could be, like I'm just always trying to be big on like breathing and just being in the moment and just absorbing everything and being happy. Like not letting the moment get too big. So I think Paris Hart is really like something that really defines me of a person, of like my outlook in life of just being happy, trying to be an optimist, and like there's a lot of like crappy things that are happening in the world right now. We could see them, accept them, like see them for what they are, but then we could overcome it and be positive. So Paris Heart is just like the positivity.
Yeah, yeah. I only ask because I think I think that's interesting too, where you're kind of like, you know, you create these kind of like a stage name or whatever, you know, like, and then you're like, oh, like that helps me get to this point, and then it like, actually this is me, like, you know, like it's like this kind of blend of like who you are, and then also like not like a character, but like, you know, like I don't know, I guess I just say alter ego, or yeah, like you said, start as an alter ego, and then it kind of moved into this like, actually this is a part of me that like I just brought out through this, you know, alter ego, and now it's like there. So I was just curious about that. Yeah, like Madonna and all of that, like these people that like, I mean, you have to come up with some type of name. I mean, you guess you don't have to go by your name, or like you just be, oh, I'm just like Robbie Williams or whatever. But it's like, nah, a name adds a little something to it. Like it adds a little mystique. It adds a little bit of like, yeah, just that little extra je ne sais quoi. Right. All that good stuff. No, please go on.
For real, like, I mean, I went through like 5 different music names. I think it's one of those things that it's nice to try out for a little bit, or realize like, you know, this is who I am. Especially for like someone like Eminem. Like, if he was B Rabbit, I don't think he's as big as he is today. Like, it's a cool name, and the names do give you like I remember that stage of my career. But I think trying to find a good one is okay, and it's okay to switch your name. Like, Prince did it late in his career. Eminem did it early in his career. Like, if you feel the vibe of needing a name change, I think it's one of those things that is cool. Like, it's supposed to be an expression.
Right. And I think a level of growth as an artist too. Yeah, like where you reach that point where you're like, yeah, this name fit that artist I was back then, and now this name fits the artist that I am now, you know, kind of a good differentiate, like Puff Daddy, Diddy, all that, you know, P Diddy to Diddy to
Brother Love.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And you can kind of see the eras too. Like the Puff Daddy was more of that, okay, like kind of gangster rap, like 80s into the early 90s. And then when he went to P Diddy, it was kind of that poppy kind of hip hop that was big, with like the beats really backing it, and then all the stuff he's doing now, yeah, with his like federal a wanted man avoiding the feds.
I will never understand his case, because they searched his house and then he made a song saying you searched the wrong house. Like, that is the most rapper thing you could do. Like, the hip hop community is so against snitching, but they do it to themselves every time.
Yeah. What was that? That was a big thing a few years ago, right? Like a couple SoundCloud like rappers that were like confessing to murders essentially in their songs, and they like used it in the court to like get them in jail. That's insane. Yeah.
They actually had a huge thing in New York the last few years with this new mayor, where he was starting to get a whole bunch of rappers, and then like Meek Mill and a bunch of these big name rappers came and was like, you can't, like, you shouldn't be able to use it. It's just art. But it's hard. It's hard when someone's like, I ran in this house at 2 a.m. with 6 of my friends, and then there's a story that matches exactly what they're saying. Like,
right.
I think there's a level of it.
Yeah. The confessional versus fictional kind of how far do you want to go? I think that's something with social media too. Like, social media incentivizes the confessional kind of angle, where like, yeah, like confessing your personality or like something you did, when it does humanize you depending on what it is, right? Because if you're confessing something that everybody relates to and they all do too, like, oh yeah, that's true, and everybody hits like. But then like if you're confessing something like that where like you committed a crime and like it's getting you, I don't know, I mean, it's strange, the incentives with that, and kind of how we're all chasing the dragon that is the social media algorithms. All right, the last couple of questions for this, we're all like kind of writing questions and are kind of craft questions. What is your routine like? What is your songwriting process like? You mentioned a little bit about like kind of coming up with like bits and pieces. Are you somebody that sits down every day to write? Are you somebody that just kind of takes little bits and pieces, comes back to it later? Like how do you like to kind of write your songs and your lyrics and all that?
So if someone says something, or if life has an experience that I go through or someone's telling me about, I'll usually be like, that's interesting. It hasn't happened before, or that quote, I really like that quote, and then I'll put the quote in my notes and I'll just leave it for later. And then throughout the day, I'll just always have music playing, whether it's other artists or beats playing in the background. I'm someone that if I'm moving around the house, music's playing. So I'll usually have some beats playing that producers send me, and I'll be like, oh, that perked my ears up. Like, what is that? And then I'll sit down and I usually just start writing. It'll usually just be like it's usually the harmonies at first of just me humming along to it. Right. Usually me just trying to catch a vibe. I'm huge on just the right vibes. So if I catch a vibe, then I'll throw some words on it. And then I'll look through my notes and just some of the things that I've gone through in life. And then I'll read something and be like, oh, that's the idea of the song. And then I'll usually just write half a song. And then by then I'm like, I'm bored of it, or I'm overthinking it. Like, what should I put next? What should I do? And then I'll just usually stop there, and then I'll finish the rest in the studio. But I'm huge on just catching a vibe. Like, I think all music should be a vibe. It shouldn't be forced.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and in terms of like kind of those little pieces, it's almost like putting a puzzle together. Like I always talk about like creativity is almost like a form of discovery. Like it's like we're not like it's not like we're forming something out of nothing, although you kind of are, but like it's like it's not magic. It's like kind of searching for the right feeling vibe, like the thing that fits this thing to your ear, to your brain, whatever it is, like kind of like these little pieces that kind of come together, and you kind of put the puzzle together after you've put out all these little like scraps of paper. How do you usually do it? Do you do it like notes app, scraps of paper? How do you usually like to?
It depends on like where I'm at. If I'm in nature, like I'll just usually have my notebook, and if I'm at home, sometimes I'll have my phone, or if it's like it just really depends on the vibe. Sometimes I'll get the candles out and I'll just get a notebook out, and I'll just put some slow music in the back, and I'll start just poetry, just writing. Right. And it just really depends on the vibe. I try to do it as many ways as I can. Sometimes I'll open up a Google Doc on my computer and I'll throw some stuff into, like, I'm not really organized. It tends to just be like wherever I'm feeling.
Yeah.
The organization is not there with me.
Yeah. Do you usually carry a notebook with you, or do you have like a treasured notebook that like is like until you fill it up, you just have like a special place? It's like this is my notebook. Like,
so I have two notebooks. One of the notebooks I like take with me everywhere, and then I have a more intimate one that my friend actually gave me back in the day. And if it's a deep song, I'll usually go in that one and just write it. And then the one serves as like, okay, if I lose this, like, it's a lot of good songs lost, but the other one is like, I poured my blood on this page. Like,
right. Yeah, absolutely. I like that you're like handwriting it in a notebook too. Like that's like an even deeper connection. That too. I like that you have two separate ones too, because we had a writer on once that was talking about how he had separate desks for like his nonfiction versus fiction. Like he's like, I can't be like making things up at this nonfiction desk because I have to go over to the fiction desk, and like these two different desks in the same room. I was like, yeah, it's real, man. It's real. Like you gotta have like you've gotta like. And I think that goes to strengths and weaknesses. Like, somewhere in your mind that like, I need to have two notebooks and they need to be kind of different in this way. And even if nobody else knows about it, like, it's just part of the process. Like, that's art. Like, okay, yeah, like you have to take it seriously in this kind of way, and then you get good results. So we love that. We love hearing about like kind of the actual craft process on this podcast. This other one we always ask artists that come on, how do you make a living? Do you make any money off of the music? Do you have to have a day job? Like, how do you do that? And we don't have to get into any numbers or anything like that, but I think everybody's always curious about this. Like, how do you make a living writing? How do you make a living doing music? Like, all these different creative fields, because it's tough out there. It's rough out there for people. So how do you do that? How do you make a living?
Well, the first and foremost to everybody, it's a hobby until it brings money.
Right.
That's what all my my OGs and everyone always told me. So, you know, for most of us creators, you have to work. So for a while, I was actually a travel CNA. And I went around, I got in with a good company and they like paid for me to travel a few places. So it gave me a chance to like explore the US as well as like have time to create. But over time, it has turned to like the photography, clothing, and YouTube is the main thing right now. But
Right.
I love the CNAing of it. Like that was fun too, and I think everyone out there should should do both. Should go have a 9 to 5 and do that and create, because there's something about the grit that it gives you, and like it makes you work harder, because if you only have, it's like the South Park guys where they're like, we have to create a show in 5 days. Like
Right.
it's kind of like, okay, I have to get ready for my shift. I have to get ready. Like I have to really bang out this song or get this done. So for a while I was a travel CNA, but now it's just content creation.
Yeah, that's great. How long did it take you to get to that level where you can make a living off the creation stuff?
It's about, oh my gosh, for everything, I've been on each platform for a while now. Like
Right.
Instagram and TikTok has been for a long time, but YouTube, I've been on about 6 months and it's already been getting some traction. It's really just understanding the platforms, I would say, and however long it takes you to get the algorithm down, like to get paid off that. And everyone out there, Threads is starting to pay. So if you get on Threads, that could get some good income quick, because not a lot of people are on it yet.
Right. Creators are like, they're kind of, because I guess because it's connected to Instagram, people aren't paying attention to it. Like they're just posting through the basic Instagram. Yeah, because I'm not even doing Threads. I'm just doing Instagram stuff. And now you're saying it, I'm like, oh, maybe I should start
If you
doing
want
Threads.
If you want the social media breakdown, man, I could give you which ones are best for which.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
So Facebook, everyone out there, Facebook is really, really big for international audiences. Once you get monetized, 1,000 views on Facebook is actually like $10. So they pay pretty healthy. Getting on there, getting the international fans. I'll tell everyone to go do that, because Facebook is like, it's for everyone. People forget that it's like still so popping, because anyone who's like probably like 20 years older than you, like they're on there. That's
Right.
what they know. And it's hard to get people to switch their regiment. So if you have stuff for more mature audiences, Facebook is the place to be. Threads, they're starting to pay more for creators. I actually have a few friends that are like making $1,000 a week off of it, just off of posting, and off their algorithm. It's still, you can't pay to promo your post, so it's still kind of getting up there in numbers, and it's still pretty easy to do. Like if you post, you'll get a lot of traction, and I think interacting on there, the creators are more open to interacting, like help each other grow on there. So that's pretty big to get popped off. On Twitter's kind of tough.
Yeah.
That's a doom scrolling in like galore, but it doesn't get you paid. But I realized between Twitter and Blue Sky, it gets a lot of viewers to YouTube. I don't know what the connection is, but
Right.
if you're posting on that a lot, like YouTube is king of everything. So try to get the YouTube up. Facebook pays really well. I'd be on Facebook, and then Threads is just starting to roll out their payments. They just did a few months ago. So those three right there could get any creator honest living quickly. So any creators out there, try to push those three.
Yeah. Any? What about TikTok? What are your feelings on?
TikTok is cool, but they're more for if you're a brand or if you're pushing something. So if you have for example, like a podcast would be great for TikTok, because they have the creator marketplace. And anyone who's out there listening, once you hit a certain amount of followers on TikTok and Instagram, they have something called the creator marketplace. It's different on Instagram, but it's essentially the same thing. So once you hit that point, it like, you could even YouTube this. It'll have like a whole store, like a whole list of just all these companies looking for sponsors, looking for posts, and you could just submit to them right through the app. So if you're on there and you hit those metrics that they're looking for, you could literally just see, okay, there's this company, let me message them on the app. And if you message like I'll say 100, for example, 100 a day, and you get 8 companies that respond, each paying you like, I don't know, like $50 just to post, you have a solid 400 in a day just off posting. So it's like,
it's that creator marketplace is really good. And like, if you're someone who wants to do that, wants to have a TikTok shop, et cetera, that's a really good place to make money. But you have to be willing to kind of sacrifice that little bit of the brand on their platform for the sponsorship posts. So they pay really good, but it's more corporation pay rather than like pay per view or organic like viewers pay.
Right.
But also too, if you work with a sponsorship posts, they usually promo the post as well because the companies want the best for the post. So you kind of get a double bang for your buck on TikTok. It really helps exploding too, but you got to be willing to work with those companies.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I'm not big enough to where I'm getting any of that stuff for like the podcast, but it's still like I got my first offer a few months ago from like somebody reaching out to me for like sponsorship stuff, and they weren't really going to pay me, and it didn't quite fit the podcast and stuff. It was like a custom jewelry, and I was just like, do you know who you're emailing here? I was like, it doesn't really fit like my audience or what I'm doing. And I was like, did you just like get me off a list that you're like sending like 1,000 like creators this stuff? And I think that's what it was. I just politely was like, thank you, like, but I think we're gonna pass, and you're not offering me any money, so I'm definitely gonna pass. Like they were like offering me free product, but I was like, what am I gonna do with these necklaces or whatever for like girls? Like, I don't know what this like. Why you're reaching out. But I mean, I guess that's just what they do now. Yeah, that is the advertising now. That's why all these companies and labels and publishers are obsessed with how many followers you have. There was a viral video I saw of Maya Hawke, Ethan Hawke's daughter, talking about how she was told by casting directors that she didn't have enough followers or something on Instagram to be cast. And I'm like, yeah, every industry at every level is obsessed with how many followers you have. And then they pretend like they're not, but like, no, that is... The algorithms on social media are driving all the creative industry right now, which is partly why it's like kind of crumbling, like the old way at least, because like I always say, they're trend chasers now. They're not making the trends like we talked about earlier, where they would just find an artist in like some club and be like, hold on, like that's going to be a hit. Come with me, like, and whatever their shady shit they would do with that too, where they would take all the money, but still, like, at least they were putting out like a new original kind of artist. Now, instead of creating trends, they're chasing them on these algorithms. So if something's trending on TikTok, they'll like be reaching out to that person immediately, kind of chasing the trend, catch the viral train almost. It's interesting how that's playing out, because I think that is kind of what everybody's kind of orbiting around, this new way of marketing. And like you said, Paris just giving that breakdown of each of these platforms. I mean, that's beautiful. Yeah. Because it does matter. It's like, you can't just be an artist anymore. You can't just be like, like the rock star kind of aloof, trashing hotel rooms, Motley Crue, like kind of, banging these girls or whatever in orgies. It's like you can't just be like aloof. You have to be a business person. You have to be an entrepreneur. You have to know what's in the contract. You have to know what you're signing. You have to, it's just crazy. It's just so much more work than just being like kind of like an artist that gets shuffled around by a team or something, like it's just insane. And I mean, with publishing the reason I talk about publishing so much is because that's what I know the most, but it's just kind of like those days are gone where like they would send like a town car to the airport for your tour. Like they don't even give you a tour anymore. It costs too much. Like they're not going to spend that kind of money. Unless you're like a Stephen King or something, hey, Maine, like Stephen King or somebody like, huge, then they'll pay the money because they know they're going to get sales back. But like, if you're somebody struggling, you're somebody just has a couple books out or a couple albums out or something that you put out yourself, like they don't give a shit. They're like, all right, how many followers do you have? Because we're not going to pay for the marketing. You have to do the marketing. So it's just, and I mean, yeah, you just have to be so aware of this. Like it's each platform now, and there's only a couple of them, but you have to know every single one and how they work. And you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to, like you said, you have to do photography, you have to do design, you have to do clothing, you have to do, and on your music, and then oftentimes you have to have a day job too until you get out of that. It's a lot. So I understand why people are frustrated for sure. Another thing we like to ask every artist that comes on here, what advice would you give to artists out there just starting out, maybe trying to build something on their own?
I would say not every deal is a good deal. Just be super cautious and try not to do anything for the quick cash or like the quick buzz or don't try to think about every decision for longevity, because
in these type of industries, there's not a handbook that's like, do this, do that. Like any space where you're a creator, it's all trial and error. I mean, you're going to have people that screw you over, people that scam you. Like it's gonna get tough at more times than not, but just be true to yourself and like, just be the most authentic version of yourself. I know that sounds so cliche, but like, if you do it for the love and the passion of it, and like just say screw the numbers, I'm doing it because I like it. Like that's how you're gonna make it. Like it sounds super duper cliche, but just going out there posting, someone says that they like it and being like, thank you. Someone says they don't like it, and it's like, thank you for your feedback with a grain of salt. Like just being active online and just being true to yourself, and not trying to conform your morals for anybody else or switch who you are. Like just be true to yourself and do it for the love. Don't do it for the financials, the monetary gain. That's going to come if you keep doing it for the love and care.
Yeah. I love that. David Foster Wallace has said this, like, kind of the reason cliches are cliches is because they're true. They're this kind of universal advice that has been handed down for centuries. Like, don't count your chickens before they hatch, right? Like, it's like, okay, yeah, that's a cliche, but like, it's telling you something real. Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't count on something that isn't there yet. Like, don't put all of your eggs into this basket, right? Don't put everything on this bet, like, because it may not work out. It's not materialized yet. It's like universal kind of advice that has been handed down for centuries from people that have failed. Yeah, that have like know better, like made the mistakes. So yeah, I love that. Another thing we like to ask, because like you already said, like everything that fills your head kind of informs your creativity. So what you're taking in, either scrolling the timeline or the art you're consuming, fills your head, and then it kind of comes out in a subconscious kind of way. So we like to ask artists that come on here, are you reading anything good, watching anything good, listening to anything good that you've been would recommend, or like what's filling your head right now as a creative? Like,
oof, the three biggest things, I'll say three because the third one's not a choice, but I'm really big into One Piece right now. Like I just binge watched the whole series in like 8 months. So it has over 1,000 episodes. If you're looking for something to take your time away, like
what is that?
One Piece?
Yeah.
It's an anime about basically a kid who wants to become king of the pirates. So there's a whole pirate era that's breaking free. I'm not gonna say why. I'm not gonna spoil because you can spoil a lot. But it's one of those shows that it starts off pretty mild, and then halfway through it just gets really intense and becomes like it's cool because I like cartoons and anime so much more than like seeing real people, because they get away with pushing the boundaries of like right. things that you're not supposed to do or say, because if it was a real person, they'll be like, oh no, they look at what this person said. So I think they do a good job with touching on a lot of things that are like serious issues, but in a cartoon way where it's like alluding to what it is. So One Piece is like one of my favorite shows of all time now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I've been reading and listening to a lot of Khalil Gibran. That's been my guy lately. Just love the things that he says and does, and what he did in his life, I think, is like from being an immigrant to like becoming one of the most known, like best known authors. I think he's pretty dope guy. If y'all haven't listened to his poems or read them, I would say do that. And the third thing is politics. Every time I get on TikTok and Instagram, or not Instagram as much, but TikTok and Twitter, it's straight politics. So yeah. I've been following that, and I've been trying to get away, because my belief, I don't know what people's beliefs are, but my belief is if you want to be someone like a king or leader of the free world, I'm going to look at you some type of way, because the people that I know and that I meet in day-to-day life, they want to be teachers, construction workers, police officers, and they don't want to have that stress. So if you're someone that wants to take that much stress under your belt, you're a crazy person.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, yeah, I just had a political consultant on, We talked about that, where he was talking about, like, everybody thinks that, like, oh, I'm going to be different when I get power, or like if I'm in a position of power. He's like, no, you're not. You're going to be just like every other human being that's ever had it before you, and you're going to abuse it. And like, he's like, it changes you. Like when you have that ultimate, like, kind of, you can stroke the pen and all of a sudden you're in charge. Like it changes you. Yeah, like you have to be crazy to want that, because you will change. It's like, yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy stuff. But I love that with terms of like, also like the animation, like you were talking about, like the kind of the freedom in animation to portray almost anything. I remember my favorite song, like musical composer, like Howard Ashman, he did Little Shop of Horrors musical. That was like his big break. And then he did Beauty and the Beast, Little Mermaid, and Aladdin for Disney. Like Disney hired him to do like those soundtracks, which I think are Beauty and the Beast. I think is one of the best musical scores ever written. And like he always said that, where he said like musicals, he's like, they're kind of silly. He's like, when all of a sudden you're watching a musical and everybody breaks out into song on stage or something, you're like, oh, it's almost a little silly. He's like, you know where you can get away with that? Animation. He's like, animation, it makes sense. We can be silly as we want to be. We can do talking parrots, like we can do whatever we want, and they can sing the song. Like you're allowed to be silly in animation over like this stuff that really helps the art form. So I mean that's fantastic. Anime is huge right now, and like manga and all that stuff. I mean, that's overtaking publishing too. Like the manga stuff is bigger than any novels or anything anybody's or any poetry. Yeah. So there you go.
It's crazy. They're becoming like the new comic books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the final question we like to ask everybody, what are you working on now? What's taking up your time, your creative energy?
So I have some songs coming out. Just really trying to get the songs good and trying to get the live performance better. Like I want to be able to give the fans a performance that's like something that they can sit with and resonate with, and is not just someone bouncing from each side of the stage. Like I want to give people just a dope experience and some dope music to just back it up. So that in the visuals, trying to really focus on the visuals as well for these songs, and just giving people some dope visuals for music. Like just giving some people some great music and great visuals.
Yeah, for sure. Paris, this has been fantastic. Where can people find your stuff?
Well, thank you for having me, Andrew. It's been a pleasure. Like it's been so good, such good vibes. It doesn't even feel like we've been recording for as long as we have the conversation with Owen. But I'd like to thank you for having me. Everyone out there listening, you can find me everywhere at Paris Heart Official. That's Paris the city, to the heart in your chest, to the music in your ears, Paris Heart. Just go vibe with me, and let's see how far that this music thing could take us.
Fantastic. And that's all linked below as well, listeners. This has been another episode of Heavy Board.
Heavy.
Board.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Board.
I may say the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.